The news of the so-called Dimitriev package comes amid continued Russian attacks targeting energy and civilian infrastructure, which only deepens the extent of the humanitarian and energy crisis in Ukraine. To have an in-depth look into the latest developments, I'd like to welcome to the program Elisabeth Braw, Senior Fellow at the Atlantic Council. Thank you so much for joining me on World News tonight.
Thank you.
So let's revisit the quote from President Zelenskyy, the one that I mentioned at the very top of the show. Intelligence showed me the so-called Dimitriev package that he presented in the U.S. It amounts to around $12 trillion. President Trump is businessman first, and this package, if introduced, means a massive deal between the U.S. and Russia. What could this package include, and where would Ukraine find itself if it came to fruition?
Well, this is just the latest iteration in the negotiations over peace in Ukraine. And I think everybody, your viewers will remember that sometimes those talks include Ukraine. Sometimes they only include, paradoxically, the United States and Russia without Ukraine itself. And what has become clear is that, well, first of all, when it comes to Ukraine, the sticking point is territory. But what has also become clear is that a lot of the interest both on the American and the Russian side concerns investments in Russia, U.S. investments, because we should remember, even though the Russian economy has ticked along now for 4 years, and in fact longer, because Western sanctions have been in place for longer, the Russian economy is not doing well. Russia would quite like Western investments, and on the American side, a few key figures seem to have spotted opportunities for business. So it's all very multifaceted, and unfortunately, Ukraine is not always a protagonist in these talks, which makes it even more complicated and, frankly, not particularly advantageous for Ukraine.
Do you think that the U.S. would actually go ahead dealing with Russia and turn its back on Ukraine in the process, in the peace process, or in the negotiation process? Is it going to be business first and sentiments later?
Well, that's what I think everybody in Europe is worried about, that the opportunities, the business opportunities that do exist in Russia. We should remember many Western companies left Russia when Russia launched its full-scale invasion of Ukraine. So there are opportunities, business opportunities in Russia that currently are not being met by Western companies, or that are being met by Chinese companies. So there are business opportunities there. But I think countries that believe in the rule of law and the rules-based international order, at least the United Nations Charter, all hope that business won't supersede morality and support of an invaded country. But it seems the signals from Washington seem to shift quite often. We never really know what the thinking is, and Ukraine tries to put on present a positive outlook, or at least to be a constructive participant in these talks, because President Zelenskyy and others know painfully well that if they are seen to complain in any way, then Trump will be dismayed. And so that is what the situation is at the moment. But we should remember, nothing, as the saying goes, it's not over until the fat lady sings. Nothing is certain until a final document has been signed, and that is not the case. Yeah.
We've heard from President Zelenskyy, who said, quote, "We clearly state that Ukraine will not support even potential agreements about us without us." Do you think that Ukraine holds enough cards as of now to be able to have decisions not being made behind its back? And what would those be?
Well, it shouldn't need to be the case that an invaded country has to have strong cards in order for its interests to be respected. That's why the world has set up lots of treaties over the years, including, again, the United Nations Charter. So I think it's not for Ukraine to have to hold strong cards. But the reality, as you suggested, is that the United States and Russia may not be all that interested in and especially not Russia, in doing adhering to the United Nations Charter. Ukraine's strongest cards are, first of all, its willingness to fight. Second of all, the mineral resources. Now, they are difficult to get access to, but President Zelenskyy himself seems to have concluded that this is Ukraine's strongest cards, because we should remember that one of the many agreements that have been discussed and then agreed on in recent months and years is that agreement that Ukraine signed with the United States, with the Trump administration specifically, a few months ago. That gave essentially that allowed the United States and Ukraine to jointly explore Ukraine's mineral resources, and the United States would get a quite significant share of the revenues from those resources. So that seems to be the Ukraine's strongest cards. It was then, and it still is. But frankly, we don't know what came of that agreement.
The reason I mentioned the cards is because during this infamous Oval Office meeting, we've heard from President Trump, who was mentioning the cards on Ukraine's side. I would like to ask you also about the quote that we've heard from the statement that we've heard from Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban, who lambasted Kyiv's insistence on the European Union to cut energy ties with Russia. For Russia not to have its war economy supported. Quote, anyone who says this is an enemy of Hungary, so Ukraine is our enemy, end quote. Do you think that this statement caught anyone by surprise coming from the mouth of Prime Minister Orban?
It did not. If anything has become clear during this war, it is that Viktor Orban, for reasons that are inexplicable, seems to feel a strong connection to Russia. And it is extraordinary that Viktor Orban, while maintaining these apparently cordial relations with Russia, is also somebody who is quite welcome in Washington. You would think no leader would be able to have both those countries as close contact, but he has managed to do that. What he has also managed to do is make himself, as I think your viewers will know, completely disliked within the European Union, because what he does when going out, essentially endorsing, supporting, speaking well of Russia, or at least speaking well of maintaining relations with Russia, what he does is undermine any sort of coherent EU policy on whatever the matter may be. And that is a problem in a union of 27 countries, and one country is consistently pursuing its own path, and a very unhelpful path. So he may be well liked in Washington and perhaps in Moscow, certainly, but very, very much not in Brussels. But as your previous segment also showed, he is not particularly well liked in Hungary, and that is clearly a problem for him.
There's definitely going to be a lot of interesting statements coming from Hungary in weeks to come, considering there is a parliamentary election coming up in April. Thank you so much for joining me on the program. Elisabeth Braw, Senior Fellow at the Atlantic Council, was my guest.
Thank you.
And so this would be all the latest news for now. Thank you very much for joining me. I'm Klaudia Czerwińska, and I hope to see you back here on TVP World for more news and features in just a moment. Good night.